But first, from 100 years ago to just 30. Remember 1984, not the book, the year. It brought us the miners' strike, the most bitter industrial dispute in living memory. But how far was Margaret Thatcher prepared to go to win that battle? Government papers released under the 30-year rule revealed that the Prime Minister followed the strike with a forensic oversight bordering on obsession. They also lift the lid on the contingency discussions far too sensitive to have been made public at the time. Our culture and digital editor Paul Mason has been going through the files for 1984.
1984, the year the IRA nearly blew up the British cabinet. Elton John got married. And the most bitter strike in British history began.
Violence will not succeed, for the police and the courts will not bow to it. They are the servants not of government, but of the law itself.
That was the official line. The government neutral, the police neutral, the dispute between the miners and the National Coal Board. 30 years on, cabinet papers have been released that tell a different story. At the start, striking miners poured into Nottinghamshire to picket out the mines that were working. At first, clashes were few.
Within 5 or 6 days of our picketing in Nottingham taking place, she deployed over 9,000 riot police into Nottingham and sealed Nottingham off.
On March the 14th, government papers show ministers telling police chiefs to get tough and seeking, quotes, a more vigorous interpretation of their duties.
Overnight, things changed on the ground dramatically, and literally men being pulled out of cars, buses being stopped, drivers threatened with arrest.
For the striking miners, these documents confirm their suspicion that the policing was politicised.
Thatcher's boot boys were something we used to chant at him, and it was something that were absolutely true.
I'm telling you this, if we've got to stop out, well, November or December, we'll beat this coal board and go.
After the strike, its leader, Arthur Scargill, was criticised for starting a dispute that he could never win. But by July, the dockers were out, coal stocks were dwindling. There were moves on both sides to end it by negotiation. Amid all that, the cabinet papers show evidence of a startling intervention by John Redwood, then head of Margaret Thatcher's policy unit. John Redwood's memo, marked secret 13th of July 1984, frames the dispute in a whole new way. The extreme left, he says, is mounting a major extra-parliamentary challenge. He describes it as a revolutionary strategy aimed at destroying the government. The National Coal Board, he fears, is, quotes, crumbling, and he says to the government, you've got to stop negotiating and get back to what he calls the war of attrition. There'd been violence and intimidation, there'd been left-wing rhetoric, but was this language justified in secret official advice to the PM? We showed the letter to the man who wrote it 30 years ago.
I think that language captured how the government felt about it at the time, and it was certainly what the Prime Minister herself believed, and in some of the other documentation I think I demonstrated some of the evidence that there were groups involved in the miners' dispute who had a wider political purpose. Of course, quite a lot of them were decent mine workers very worried about their jobs, I understand that, but there was another element in this strike as well.
Everybody knew the stakes were political. Miners had brought down Ted Heath's government 11 years before. It's clear from the papers that by July 1984, with a dock strike on top of a miners' strike, ministers were considering bringing in troops to move essential supplies and declaring a state of emergency and beefing up the law to allow it. And in the middle of that discussion, somebody gave them a secret opinion poll. The poll asked, is it wise for the government to bring in troops to see the coal moved to steelworks in serious danger and to electricity power stations threatened with shutdown? 71% thought it was unwise.
I was very against using the army, and so that's why none of my documents recommending it, and why I was trying to calm things down. I was saying it's not that extreme. This is an industrial dispute. It should be a dispute between the coal board and the miners. I don't want the government to be party to this dispute.
Being a miner in them times, it was
For a new generation, the strike is pre-history. This team, making a documentary with strike veterans, includes people who were not born when the strike started. But for those who were, the archives are a confirmation of hunches they've always had.
Our story is the strike from below, from the miners on the front line, from the women on the front line of picketing and in the kitchens, and it will show that what they suspected and what was going on, that what they went through was politically orchestrated by the government. Am I surprised at what they did? No, because anyone in their position would do exactly the same. The surprise is that it was written down so clearly, and I think that future governments probably won't write down what they're doing in quite as clear a manner.
You saw the scenes which went on in television last night. I must tell you that what we've got is an attempt to substitute the rule of the mob for the rule of law. And it must not...
Her determination was so great that the released documents show she was involved at levels of minute detail. Her handwriting is everywhere. She is calculating tonnages of coal, the payoff needed to end the dock strike, underlining every other word.
The Prime Minister was absolutely resolute. She thought that democracy was on the line. She felt that union action had brought down 3 previous elected governments, and that it was very important that the next elected government showed that it could carry on governing.
Police swarmed through the main street, scattering crowds as they went.
So, with memories still raw, what do today's revelations mean to those who took part in the conflict?
I think there's one short lesson from it is that they were much better organised than we were, and I think that's essentially where it comes down from. And don't trust them is the truth. Don't trust anything that they say.
The scars of 1984 run deep, but so too do the records.